think I was on here, was it 2 hours ago? Good to see you guys. I've been working, feels like flat out all day. I've actually just put up a video on Mo Wilson. There's a fugitive that's been on the run for 12 days, Caitlin Armstrong. So I'm trying to sort of get my head around that case. There's some very interesting information that I'm kind of party to, because I'm a mountain biker myself, a cyclist myself. So there's some very interesting sort of social media related context to that that's really fascinating. And I can't wait to really get to that, but we need to take it step by step. Who is here? Okay, Robbie, Rob, and Stephanie, good to see you here. Nisi, good to see all the usual suspects. Karina, good to see you. PW, Paddy, good to see you as well. Susan Becker is also here. So in this episode, we're going to try and get through Amsterdam. I may do a little bit of skipping of letters, just because when he deals with this sort of religious stuff, when you've dealt with that once, you know what he's getting at, right? I won't sort of skip through the descriptions that he gives, but I think I'm going to move through some of them when it's sort of the religious stuff. When I say I've been working flat out, I've worked so much that I actually haven't had dinner. So I may eat a banana halfway through this, just because I'm quite hungry. I just haven't really had a chance to do anything. I'm happy with my work, but I'm feeling a bit glum about not exercising. It's one of my priorities, and so I'll probably start off tomorrow, not with work but with exercise. So I'll be really glad when this Johnny Depp trial's over, because it sucks up so much time, even when you're only paying a restricted amount of attention to it. It still sucks up so much time, and then you get so much uphill for that anyway. So I don't know, it is frustrating. One of the most nutritional fruit, indeed. And the color that Van Gogh loved so much. I mean, isn't this the color of sunshine and, health, I guess? I mean, how many fruits do you know that are yellow? There's the lemon, but what other fruits are that sort of yellow color? Yeah, and sunflowers. Well, Timmy was just sitting on my foot, and my foot was so nice and warm for a moment, and now he's gotten up. Timmy, do you want to say hello? I guess in the same way I've neglected me, I've also neglected you a little bit, hey? Although I did take him for a walk today. He had an amazing walk yesterday where my brother and I kind of kicked a soccer ball around for like over an hour, and so he got a really fun deal by chasing the soccer ball, and when he was done with that, playing with all the other dogs. So he had like an extended fun time outside. Okay, so what else can I sort of tell you guys about? Yeah, just that this Mo Wilson case, I think, is going to be quite interesting. I don't know how long this woman is going to be successfully on the run, but so far I think she's made it one day longer than Casey White and Vicky White. So, how long is she going to continue? We'll see. Fetch to me. Okay, yeah, good one there. I guess before I get started, some observations on the Johnny Depp trial. I thought I listened to a little bit of the testimony from the sort of industry expert. I thought that was quite interesting. Tabulating the losses and all that kind of thing. But not really much else to report on that. Okay, so should we get going with Vincent van Gogh? Oh, I did have a thought that I want to share with you guys. I think some of you are here from, he's the mascot. Mo Wilson, that is right. It's a little bit unusual because it's all three of the people involved, I think, were sort of quite sporty. And you don't often see sporty people in true crime. I mean, Oscar Pistorius, O.J. Simpson, but besides them, it's usually not to this level of like a professional sports folks, very high level, put it that way. It's just a little bit unusual. Like, I don't know, do sports people not have time to be criminals? They're too disciplined or too focused or something. But I did actually have a thought with regard to the Johnny Depp case, and it is the fact that a piece of his finger was essentially amputated, the fact that a piece of his finger was removed, that it was fragmented, makes me sort of wonder, how likely is it that it was that it wasn't cut off, just because it's difficult to crush a finger, whatever it is, and then actually have that piece of tissue separated, if that makes sense. So if you think about it from the perspective that it wasn't just crushed, but it was actually severed, it does make you wonder how that could be possible from a crushing type injury. Does that make sense? And although there was signs of crushing in terms of the bone, you've also got to think, what on earth could have done this? It's, I don't know, like if you say it wasn't a bottle and it wasn't a door, it's still quite difficult to imagine. Of course, there was the blunting of the injury even more by painting with it. I'm just saying, when you see it from that perspective, it is kind of difficult to fathom. I think you've almost got to imagine this craziness of stumbling around and glass all over the place, but then also, could you have tripped and fallen, or could you have slammed your hand down on the table and there was something sharp or something? I don't know. Or could something really heavy, like a table, like a metal table, have toppled over onto his hand, or a refrigerator or something like that? I don't know. It's definitely something that isn't immediately clear if you think of it from that perspective. Yeah, Stephanie says it would have to be a sharp door to slice. Yeah, it would have to be something possibly metallic. I don't think a wooden door would do it, and there would be wooden splinters as well. Yeah. And it would have to be, one thing that could possibly do it is a sort of trellis type door that acts almost like a scissors. If you did this very, very quickly, then maybe, like very, very quickly and very, very hard, maybe something like that did happen. Wow, in a printing press. Wow, okay. A friend of mine is not alive anymore, but a friend of mine, I always just, I don't know, I get the heebie-jeebies when I think of it. He was cutting bread, with one of those machines that where you turn it, it's got like a blade. I won't explain exactly what happened, but just the same effect. And that is definitely an ouch. Okay, shall we get going? There are about 18 of us in here. We had about 10 minutes. Let's get going. Okay, so it's the 12th of June, 1877. Letter from Vincent van Gogh to Theo, written from Amsterdam. Dear Theo, I received your letter on June 7 and was glad to learn from it that you had been to Eton and spent Sunday there. It was fine that father and little brother, so that's obviously Cor, and And I must say, you almost never hear from this little brother of theirs. You hear about Theo constantly. You hear about Anna fairly frequently. You hear about Vil and Les, but you almost never hear about this little brother, which is kind of strange. He's got such a close relationship with his one brother and virtually like a non-existent relationship with the other brother. I was also thinking that so let me first put this in another way. Have you guys ever corresponded with a sibling? Like ever? Have you guys ever written letters to a sibling of yours? Wow, Stephanie. Close one. Yeah. Oh, Nisi says yes. Was it a brother or a sister? Stephanie says not through the mail. Anyone else? So I don't know whether I'm Karina says I have to my sister all the time. Okay. Even now? Susan Baker says yes. Robbie Robbins says only cards. Stephanie says only written letters in cards. Paddy says many years ago to my brother. Stephanie says my sister lives 15 minutes away. Okay, that's a good. So this is going back a long time, before social media, before Facebook, before the internet, really. My brother went to boarding school, and my brother's an artist, and he was an artist then, and he was, so in a weird way, for quite a while, maybe a year, about a year at least, I wrote letters to my brother and he wrote to me, and some of those letters did contain descriptions of his art and what he was painting, and he was not happy at the school he went to, and his only comfort in a way was in his art. So I had a bit of a Van Gogh type experience, I guess, with him. I also wrote, I guess, more than average to my grandmother on my father's side and some cousins. We wrote letters and so on. I was someone who just loved writing. So, yeah, I wrote to my brother a fair amount, and also to my one grandmother, and to my cousins also a little bit. I was just thinking, about, did I ever write to my brother? And I thought, wow, I actually did. And weirdly enough, art was part of the conversation because he went on to become a full-time artist. Stephanie says, did you save your brother's letters? I think the short answer is no. I had a very big box that had a lot of letters in it, like a box that's the size of a desk almost. And my father kind of put a lot of pressure on me, because when I left home, I left a lot of letters and documents and things, paraphernalia behind. My father put quite a lot of pressure on me, to get rid of it or to take it. And I think what eventually happened was he got rid of it, or he took it somewhere. And although I wanted to keep what I had, I mean, I obviously collected it. In the end, that's sort of what happened. So yes and no, but ultimately no. Yeah. Nisi says it gave my sister comfort in boarding school. First time away, and Europe was furthest she had ever traveled. Oh, so that's quite interesting. So it was also a boarding school type situation. Karina says, I have a box of letters from my grandmother. They are my treasure. That's cool. I did keep a diary, so I may have referred to some of those letters that I wrote, and that he sent. I know I kept a couple of letters in that diary, but yeah. Karina says, I was in boarding school. Oh, okay. Okay, so yeah, it's quite interesting thinking about that. So I think quite a few of you are sort of had letter writing in your histories. Robbie Robbins says, I still have lots of letters and cards from friends. I must say, in my life, I've got papers all over the place, notes, documents, manuscripts, yeah, letters. I mean, I had quite a lot of love letters, and I think they were also in that box that disappeared. I kept quite a lot of my letters from girlfriends and that sort of thing. Nisi says, my hope chest is full of letters and notes from childhood. Okay. Now, there's something about, if you're going to research a person's life, there's something intimate about handwriting and letters that, and I don't know whether it's the same with, let's say, social media. I just don't think that the level of intimacy and the level of detail is the same, which makes one sort of feel like as time goes on, the history of a person becomes shallower. I mean, think about how deep the history is of Van Gogh and compared to our letter writing now, which is like non-existent. I suppose one could refer to emails, but the email, it's how often do you write a meaningful email? Stephanie says he saved most of mine to him, so now I have them. Oh, okay. Nisi says, I think we are all interested in writing by what we have kept so personal. Interesting. So Van Gogh writes, and then you tell me that you spoke with father and mother about your plans for the future. So if you guys remember in the previous live on the letters, we kind of established that Theo was actually struggling as well and having some difficulties as well. Anyway, so he says, when I read that about his plans for the future, my heart went out to you. I think you are quite right. Launch out into the deep. But I only hope that you will go to London before you see Paris. We must calmly wait and see how things turn out. I've loved so many things in these cities. I often recall them with tender melancholy. And I almost wish to go back there with you. When I occupy a small place in the large Dutch Protestant church, those recollections will furnish many a topic for sermons. Let us go on with faith and confidence, you and I. Jumping a little bit down, he says, I'm very busy every day, so time passes quickly, and the days are almost too short, even when I stretch them very little. He says, I have such a great longing to make progress and also to know the Bible well and thoroughly. He says, and also to know many things like what I copied for you about Cromwell, not a day without a line, by writing, reading, working, and practicing daily. Perseverance will lead me to a good end. So when he talks about not a day without a line, I think he's talking about, it's almost, I mean, I suppose you could interpret it if you're a drug addict, not a day without a line, but if you're kind of obsessed with art and the arts, then this whole idea of not a day without a line, not a day without reading something, not a day without writing something, not a day without, that kind of thing. This week, I visited the cemetery here outside the Meaderpoort. In front of it is a little wood where it is very beautiful, especially when the sun shines through the leaves in the evening. There are many beautiful graves and all kinds of evergreens, and roses and forget-me-nots are in bloom. I also walked to the Seder again. It is 40 minutes from here, along a dike from which one can see meadows and farms all around. It always reminds me of Rembrandt's etchings. Now, my own great-grandfather, Tinus de Jong, he was also inspired by Rembrandt's art and the way Rembrandt captured light. the way light and the dark interacted. Something that really stood out to me when I was just sort of preparing for today was just this idea of Vincent is 23 years old, 24 years old. He's this 24-year-old, and what is he doing with his time? He's going to a cemetery. How many 24-year-olds do you know that are, hi Bria, good to see you. Thanks for making it. How many 24-year-olds do you know that hang around cemeteries and think that they are beautiful, kind of thing? So you've got a very serious young man here, a very intense individual. He goes on to say, Amsterdam is a beautiful city. Today I again saw a little corner for Taste Maurice to paint. It talks again about the East Church on a little square. Then he says, okay, I'm going to skip through that. Then he says, this morning at 4:45, there was a terrible thunderstorm here. Must say, it's hard for me to imagine thunderstorms in the, it just seems to be always kind of cool. The Netherlands are cool and overcast. It doesn't seem to get terribly hot there, but nevertheless, this is June, it is summer. He says there was a terrible thunderstorm shortly after the first gang of workmen came through the gates of the yard in the pouring rain. I got up and went out into the yard, taking a few copybooks with me to the summer house. I've been sitting there looking out over the whole yard and dock. The poplars and elderberry and other shrubs were bowed down by the heavy storm, and the rain poured down on the piles of wood and on the decks of the ships. Boats and a little steamer were sailing back and forth, and in the distance, near the village across the edge, one saw swift-moving brown sails and the houses and the trees on Buitenkant and the more vividly colored churches. Again and again, one heard the thunder and saw the lightning. The sky could have been from a picture by Ruysdael, and the seagulls were skimming the water. It was a grand sight and a real relief after the oppressive heat of yesterday. I don't know if you can hear Ivy. She's jumping up against my leg like, what's the dog doing on your lap, kind of thing. Anyway, that was a really amazing portrait of that moment, right? Again, he is very good at being in the moment and capturing the moment. And that's when he seems to me to be his most authentic. Simply reliving, recording the moment, right? He says, it has quite refreshed me. So he's saying, you know, this rain in the midst of this heat of summer, he said it's refreshed him because he felt very tired when he went upstairs last night. He says, the days fly by. I'm 4 years older than you are, and probably they seem to go more swiftly to me than to you. But I fight against it by stretching them a little in the morning and evening. He says, will you write soon? And then he talks about, in the evening, I generally walk up and down there with the dog. And then I often think of that poem, Under the Stars. The roses against the house are in bloom, and in the garden, the alder bushes and the jasmine, I think that should be jasmine also. He says something about life as quicksands, life as snares. Then he says, this is quite interesting. He says, now and then when I'm writing, I automatically do a small drawing, such as I sent to you lately. So these are really the beginnings of the artist, right? Coming out. He says, I did one this morning representing Elijah in the desert under an orange sky with some hawthorns in the foreground. It is nothing special, but I see it also clearly before me. And I think that at such moments, I could speak about it enthusiastically. He says, I hope you are having a good time. When you go to the woods at Scheveningen or to the beach, say hello to them for me. When you come here again, I shall be able to show you some fine spots here too. Your loving brother, Vincent. That was quite a long letter. Now we go to 9th July, so it jumps about a month. Vincent to Theo. Dear Theo, Well, whatever you got to say about Anna, I was surprised, I can tell you, and it seems to be serious too, and it just might come off. The difficulties connected with occupying a subordinate position, especially if you have to persevere in it for a long time, as she has done for so many years in all honor and decency, are very great, at times becoming a severe struggle, making what seems easy extremely hard. I think he's talking about, when he talks about occupying a subordinate position, I think he's talking about the difficulty of being in a sort of lowly station, like being a maid, and that she's finding that difficult. Anyway, he says, yes, there's much poetry in it, and such years are a treasure if one does not easily lose. And if, particularly at first, one denies and humbles oneself, one attains a glorious feeling of inner peace. Can you see how he's already got his mind and his psychology fixed on this idea of self sacrifice and denial? He says here, and he's 24 years old, he says, if one denies and humbles oneself, you get a glorious feeling. So this whole idea that he was suffering and whatever, it was actually something that he wanted. It was a choice that he made. He wanted to live like the life of a pilgrim. That was what he thought was quite exceptional and honorable, for him. Nisi says being lower on the totem pole isn't so bad. So, hi, Sharon. Good to see you there. Sharon actually alerted me to the Mo Wilson case, and when I looked at it, not only was it interesting, but it was all over the news. It was in the New York Times, USA Today, NPR, and so on and so on and so on. Anyway, he goes on to say, for all that, one could well understand, even if this were so, that at times the future may have seemed dark to her. So it seems like all three of these siblings, Anna, Theo, and Vincent, are sort of going through a difficult time in their early 20s. I know I was. Anyway, he goes on to say, for all that, one could, as far as she is concerned, a decision on this step may seem sensible. Also, I'm inclined to believe she loves him sincerely. Oh, that was something that did occur to me. Could this be about romance? What is it that he said right in the beginning? Where he says, it seems to be serious too, and it just might come off. So it does seem to be about she's met a boy. He goes on to say, I'm firmly confident of this. He says, I'm inclined to believe she loves him sincerely. I'm firmly confident of this, else things would not have gone so far. Wonder what far is, did they hold hands? And therefore, with all my heart, I hope she will not be disappointed, but that with God's guidance, she may have found the road toward enduring happiness. May the Lord grant that she find rest and that he bless her. Then he says, how are you, my dear fellow? I should have liked to write you sooner in answer to your last letter. He talks about beautiful old churches and excellent preachers. I'm jumping around a bit. He refers to a hymn, I think. Every night the moon came out whispering to me what she had, every night the moon came whispering to me what she had seen in the silent, silent night from her high observatory in the heavens. She who remembers the ages, she wandered on, high above the foam of the deluge, and shone on the floating ark with a gentle silvery glow, as she does now on my solitary window. And also when Israel with overflowing eyes bowed down by Babylon's streams, with a sad luster she casts her rays onto the stringless harp hanging on the willows. He says, so that's the end of this poem, or whatever it is. And then he says, the moon is still shining, and the sun and the evening star, which is a good thing. So it's quite interesting. He's saying that at the time that he's writing, the moon's up, the sun's actually still up, and there's even a star in the sky. And then he says something about God being with him even unto the end of the world, and then that is it for that letter. What really hurts? I see Bria says it really hurts. My best friend decided to live life as a monk in the jungle in Thailand. In doing so, he has stopped talking to everyone he knows, including his mom and twin brother. Yeah, that is the life of a pilgrim. Is there anyone here who knows about the guy? His name's Andy, who is the central voice of Headspace. It's sort of a meditation app. He went to Thailand and he, meditated and so on. I'm not sure if he went to Thailand, but he went to the East. I know he was with monks. He may have been in the Himalayas or something, but he came back and started this sort of company that kind of monetizes meditation. So, he went from being a mute type recluse to someone who's almost like a creator on YouTube, like, making lots of episodes. Quite interesting. Nisi, do you know who I'm talking about? Andy, I'm not quite sure what Andy's surname is, but I think he's got quite a soothing voice. Okay, so let's go on to the 15th of July. Dear Theo, I'm eager to write you again, and you will also let me hear from you soon, I hope. This morning I went to the early service. The text was Ephesians 5, verse 14. Awake thou that sleepest, and arise from the dead, and Christ shall give thee light. He says, it was raining as I left the house and also when the service was over, but during the sermon, the sun was shining brightly through the windows. I remember when one of my best friends got married, there was all sorts of drama and intrigue. I won't say what it was exactly, but there was definitely a lot of tension surrounding that. And I remember just one or two things really, really clearly. Let's say three things. I remember on the drive there, the song Lemon Tree played, and I thought, wow, the words to this song are so apt to what was happening. The other thing was when the service ended, the sort of wedding ceremony ended, the sun shone through the windows, and it was quite stormy that weekend. Sort of very moody, windy, cold, stormy type weather, and then when the ceremony was sort of over, the sun broke through the clouds. And I guess it was a peculiar kind of church because there seemed to be windows kind of high up in the roof. And the sun literally shone through the roof, through the windows in the roof, onto the bride. And I still said, I wonder if that's a sign, kind of thing. And you kind of have a little bit of that, the light shining into the courtroom in the Johnny Depp case. Which is also kind of quite interesting. I don't know if you guys have noticed that. Bria says he lives in the woods in Yubon. It's so beautiful there. I totally understand why he fell in love with the land and the culture. I did, but he really decided to become a monk and his life that way. So yeah, so I remembered the song Lemon Tree, and I remember the light coming through the church, and also remember I was best man and I had to give this best man speech, and I was really not in a good place. I was about to drop out of university and this, that, and the next thing. And I just remember, like, the last thing I feel like is the best man, the last thing I want to do is give a best man speech. And I just remember just being like, I poured this glass of wine and I was just like, I'm going to down this glass of wine and then just, and then that's it. And I remember being, I think, in the bathroom even with my best man speech, which was this really badly there were like 20 very badly handwritten words on the scrap of paper. And, there wasn't really much preparation or anything. It was just like blah, 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 blah. And then apparently my best man speech, some people said, was the best I'd ever heard. But it was almost like all the things that I meant to say, I said, but the things I said between the things I meant to say were actually the things that people laughed at and found amusing. So it was actually the ad lib stuff that seemed to do the trick. Anyway, he goes on to say, Father had an early morning service today at Eton, and after that he had to go to Zundert. Later on, I heard good Uncle Stricker in the Oudzaits Chapel, which I think means Old Southern Chapel. He talks about true and sincere religious feeling in the heart. I'm not going to go through that. And then it's another chapel, Oudzaits Chapel and Old Tiertainen and something else. And then he talks about a curious part of town that reminds him of the heart of London, Booksellers Row. He says, perhaps you will go to Scheveningen today. Well, there I managed to pronounce it right. I hope you will have a pleasant Sunday. How I would like to be with you in your little room. I heard from home that you will probably soon visit Merv's house in the dunes and stay there overnight. In my mind's eye, I can see you sitting there and also know what you two will be talking about. He talks about windmills and sawmills and workmen's cottages with little gardens and waterways full of boats and picturesque bridges. He says it must be splendid to be a clergyman in an environment like that. He also says the study is very difficult, boy, but I must keep on. Then he says, are you reading a nice book? There are so many books I should like to read, but I must not. If you can get John Halifax, read it again. Now, I must say, when you just look at what he's saying in his letters, you get the feeling that he must be quite a lonely kid. If he's writing so many letters to his brother and they're such long letters, he's asking him, what are you reading? And it does come through that he must be very solitary to have this amount of time to write these letters. He says, although it's depressing to read, we must not say this is not for me, for it is good to keep your faith in everything that is good and noble. I heard that the man whose life and character inspired the author of this book died not long ago. His name was Harper, and he was the head of a large publishing firm in London. I wonder if that's not like the HarperCollins thing. I think I'm going to skip that part and go on to the next letter. So we now July 1877. Now we'd go to 27th of July. Dear Theo, thanks for your letter. From home, I heard that you visited Merv already. It must have been a pleasant day. He says, encloses a contribution to your collection, 3 lithographs after Bosboom and 2 by Wissenbruch. Then he says, the other day I met a young man who had just passed his entrance examination for Leiden University. It's not easy. He told me what they had asked him. But I must keep courage. With God's help, I will pass. And the other examinations too. So you get this idea, this guy's studying, but he's struggling. And he's going, well, I'm just going to keep at it. And it's hard and it's slow. He says, Greek lessons in the heart of Amsterdam, in the heart of the Jewish quarter on a hot and stifling summer afternoon, with a feeling that many difficult examinations await you, arranged by very learned and shrewd professors. I can tell you they can be more oppressive than the Brabant's cornfields, which are lovely on a day like today. But as Uncle Jan says, we must push on. So what I want you to think about is this earnest young man is a 24-year-old who's wandering through churches and cemeteries and reading books and so on and observing the landscape. And he's taking Greek lessons in the heart of Amsterdam. And this is the middle of summer. You know, the other kids are probably, I don't know if they have barbecues in the Netherlands, but they are probably swimming in the sea and frolicking and having fun. And you can kind of imagine him dressed up almost in a suit, and he's studying God's word, and he says, it's like this hot and stifling afternoon, and what he's busy with is difficult examinations, and he's surrounded by learned and shrewd professors. It's a very dull, boring, strict, hemmed in, self-limiting scenario for such an intense person. Barbecuing in public is illegal in France. Okay. Well, remember, at this point he's in the Netherlands, but presume it's the same there, although I'm not sure if it was 155 years ago. He goes on to say, so you kind of get the feeling that he's aware that there are some beautiful days, and that he's instead directing his youth to studying the Bible, and there's something that sort of reaches him that kind of makes him feel like something's wrong here, or should I be doing this even, right? And so he's got to motivate himself to keep going. Then he provides this kind of anecdote. He says, a few days ago, 2 children fell into the water near the Kuttenberg Bridge. Uncle saw it and ordered out a boat from the Makassar, which was tied at the dock. They dragged the little boy out. 2 ship's doctors whom Uncle sent for, and I accompanied the men who carried the little boy to the drugstore. Every effort was made to revive the child, but in vain. Meanwhile, the father, who is a stoker at the yard, recognized the little body, and they carried it home in a blanket. They continued searching for an hour and a half, thinking the little girl had also been drowned. But fortunately, that seems not to have been the case. That evening, when I went to see those people once more, it was already dark in the house. The little body was lying so still on a bed in a little parlor. He was such a pretty little boy. The sorrow was great. He had been the light of the house, as it were, and the light had now been extinguished. Though rough people express their sorrow crudely and without dignity, like this mother, one still feels deeply in the house of mourning, and the spell remained with me the whole evening while I took a long walk. Last Sunday morning, I took a fine walk. First, I went to morning service, and then he talks a bit about that. He talks about God. May God help us in our struggle to keep straight. You're right in associating with good artists. I, too, cling fast to the memory of many of them. So even though he's sort of going off on this route, on this journey, on this trajectory, he's nevertheless clinging to the memory of what he describes as good artists. He says, the afternoon of the accident, when Uncle Jan ordered the boat and the doctors to the rescue, I saw him in his element. Not quite sure what he means by that, just that maybe Uncle Jan was a good leader, perhaps. He says, before I go to work, I want to fold a sheet of paper. Generally, I get up at a very early hour, before the sun rises over the naval yard and the laborers arrive. My window offers me a magnificent spectacle. I wish you were here. Will it be given me one day to work on a morning such as this to write a sermon on these themes? He makes the sun shine on the wicked and the good. I think it should be alike. Or awake, you who sleep, and arise from the dead, and Christ shall give thee light. He says, if you have time and a stamp and paper, write me soon. Uncle Jan sends you his compliments. And that's that letter. As we go into the next letter, I'll provide a link for you guys. It's now taking us into August 1877. I want to ask you guys... what is gonna... I must be tired. I'm just... What is it gonna... 4th or 5th of June, 12th of June, 9th of July, 27th. There was something I meant to ask you guys, but now it just slipped my mind. I think I'm just a bit tired. If it comes back, I'll let you guys know. Okay, so 3rd of August, dear Theo, thanks for your last letter, which made me very happy. Many thanks. So you have been to Moves. Oh, this is what I was going to say. How many of you guys are view people? And what I mean by that is it's important for you to have a view, in your home, or in other words, you need big windows, or do you know what I mean? How many of you have a good view from your homes and sort of pay attention to that? Because I'm definitely a big view person. My father's also just like our home, where I grew up, the entire north elevation from the one side to the other is just glass. I mean, it's like glass with certain paneling here and there, but it's basically sucks in the outside, right? But I've always been someone who I can't be somewhere that's got small windows. I need a view. I need, my office where I work looks out over my garden. I'm not terribly happy with the somewhat restricted view I have where I am now, but at least it is something of a view, certainly over trees and that sort of thing. Are you guys? Oh, Karina says, I look into my garden through large glass doors. Stephanie says, Nick's been writing about and sharing about Van Gogh well before the Gabby Petito case. Yeah, I mean, I wrote a book on Van Gogh. I think it predates the Petito case by 4 years, something like that. Anyway, May, good to see you here. Nisi says, I can see the entire creek in the forest with animals below. Always need windows and doors, always open when possible. May says, Mods and Miss Gabby Petito brought me to TCRS and Van Gogh. That's awesome. Not there yet. Says, I'm late. I'm here. Good to have you here. Susan says, I have a big pineapple palm tree with a pink sunset behind. Oh, is that right now? That's cool. It's such a cool avatar. Not there yet. Hi, not there yet. Okay, so let's deal with this letter. I'm glad I remembered that thought. It was like there and then suddenly not there. So he said, so obviously Van Gogh's one of those guys who also likes a view. He spoke about the view over the sea when he was at that boarding school in Ramsgate, and he's got a view now where he is. I don't think he had much of a view when he was in Orvez, but it is quite interesting. I think it's interesting what your lived environment does to you. So in other words, if you live in a small space, does that make you small-minded or kind of crushed in? If you live in a big space, it could also make you feel disconnected, so you need the right space around you. But I've always sort of wondered, that's why I wouldn't have minded becoming an architect, is to design livable spaces, not just if you think about it, the spaces around us are all horizontal and vertical lines, and we are circular beings, you know what I mean? Although we're symmetrical, we are circular. So shouldn't windows be round? Shouldn't entrances be more the silhouette of the human form, like in Star Wars, that sort of arch? That's just kind of something interesting. Think about the Hobbit living in a round sort of tunnel shaped thing. And so we are filled with tunnels and vessels. Shouldn't we, shouldn't our, where we live echo our shape as well? It's just something to think about. In other words, if you are, if you just think about the idea of being surrounded by hard, flat surfaces, right, compared to being in sort of organic, rounded shapes, maybe that makes you a softer, sweeter, kinder person. Maybe it makes you more of a sensitive person. Maybe hard, flat surfaces make people hard, flat people. Just something to consider. I'm talking about just in a subtle psychological way. Also, the fact that you are constantly in containers. You live inside of a room, and then you get into a box, which is your car, and you go somewhere, and you go into another box, and you're always contained. Is that what a person should be? Contained? Is that what the urban infrastructure teaches you, right? Nisi says color is important too, absolutely. So he talks about, last Sunday I was at the early morning service of the Reverend Mr. Haasbrook, and later that morning I was at the Odersage Chapel, which I told you about before. Each day I try my best to get on with my work, especially Latin and Greek. Now I must say, when I studied law, I had Latin, and I really struggled with it. Just like amora massamat, that's about all I can remember. I can remember quite a few Latin legal terms, but like learning Latin, and they've since done away with it. I mean, since then, you don't even need Latin to get a LLB. But one of the reasons I stopped studying law was because of Latin, because it was like, I didn't have Latin at school. So it's like in 1 year, you must learn a language. And although I've got not bad aptitude, like with English and a couple of other languages, Latin was like, I just found it requiring too much concentration, and for what? You don't use Latin. You don't use Latin in. There's no one who speaks Latin. You know what I mean? It's a dead language essentially. So that was not. If Latin wasn't part of it, I may have gone on to become a lawyer. You never know. Anyway, he says, I've already done. So I must say, I feel for Van Gogh, because he's got to learn not only Latin but Greek as well, right? He says, I've already done a great many exercises composed of sentences that remind me of the old school days. For instance, which very excellent philosopher has been condemned to death by the Athenians? Stephanie says, dinner time, then have to bring my son to robotics. I'm halfway through my last Delphi case write-up. We'll catch the rest on replay. Thanks so much for that, Stephanie, and I did get the email with that. Just let me know when you want to do CrimeCon 3. I think we said Friday, right? So, but thanks very much for that. Then he says, the very noble and wise Socrates, our life greatly resembles a journey and is exposed to very many and very great dangers. The nature of Odysseus and the grapes of the vineyard. Now, I must say, I find this very interesting. I've always found, although I'm not interested in studying like the Greek language, Greek mythology is fascinating. The Greek civilization is fascinating. Greece is fascinating. I've really been meaning to go there. Particularly the story of Odysseus. in fact, when I wrote this book, which is I wrote this book ultimately when I was about 40 years old, but the source material, I started writing this book when I was about 18 years old. And a lot of the substance of it came from the story of Ulysses or Odysseus, right? Timmy, can I put you down? Because you keep sliding down. Hey? Can I put you down? And I always liked the power just of that name, Ulysses. It just sounds so like the old, like if you say Christ is like a divine symbol, well, then you can say Ulysses was almost one of the great heroes. And so I wanted this mythic hero as my main character. And so I called him Christopher Ulysses. I wanted this iconic man, like the man almost as the most divine version of himself, but nevertheless a man, right? Not a God figure, not a Christ figure, not a savior, not a what is a savior with the word starts with an M, not a martyr, but yeah. So anyway, not that. Right. Thanks, May. Thanks a lot for that. He's now sitting at my feet, which is actually better because my toes are exposed. So it's keeping them warm. What's a word starting with M that means savior? Just can't quite think of it. Messiah, that's the one. Messiah, that's the one. I've got a weird mind the way I think. I can sort of see a word that I'm thinking about and know what the word is. It's quite weird, isn't it? I guess I've got a bit of a literal mind. But so a Messiah, but a Messiah that is a man, not a God kind of thing. So I was trying to think of the ultimate human figure in terms of inspiration for humanity, but in a human sense, in a reachable sense, almost the way Batman doesn't have any superpowers. That was kind of where I was coming from. And so I really like the story of Ulysses. Anyway, and so yeah, he talks about the nature of Odysseus, which is, I think, the Greek pronunciation of Ulysses. I think Ulysses is more I could be wrong, it's either Roman or English pronunciation of the same person, same myth, the same mythical figure. He says, this morning I got up very early. It had been raining overnight, but very soon the sun broke through the clouds. The ground and the piles of wood and beams in the yard were drenched, and in the pools the sky's reflection was quite golden from the rising sun. At 5 o'clock, I saw those hundreds of workmen scatter like little black figures. So the feeling I kind of get, it's almost like this guy who's trapped in this role. I don't know, it's like his role, he's got to study and so on, and he's got to go through this passage, and he's feeling himself resisting, and he's finding it a difficult struggle. And it's almost like he finds relief in these seminal moments of life, these seminal moments of the light touching a puddle or a pavement or something. And in those moments, he sees reality, and it's almost like an escape from the dull, boring grind that he's forced to, like almost a theoretical reality that he is almost like cursed to figure out, right? It's like the reality just of the landscape and of light and of weather is a relief and an escape and almost like a self-evident sign of God himself, compared to the drudgery of studying the theory of life, if that makes sense. You get what I'm saying? And he keeps returning to it, returning to these scenes that seem almost magical to him, but nevertheless, I think are soothing to him. Then he says, last Monday, Father wrote me a very cheerful letter from Halford. I also heard from home that you had a 40 guilder bill from Dr. Costa. That is a big sum, and paying it will remind you of the feeling of having a tooth pulled. If only I could help you a little, but you know that I possess neither gold nor silver. I often have to resort to all kinds of devices to get money for the collections in church, by changing stamps for pennies in a tobacco shop, for instance. So you also get a clear indication here that they're kind of scrabbling for money. He's 24 years old and he doesn't have any money, doesn't have any means. He says, but my boy, by struggling we can keep on, and you know that it is written that the poor will be blessed in the kingdom of God. So he's got this psychology that being poor is okay. Being poor is actually kind of a blessing. How do you think he's going to think about that 10 years later? I think some of that, there'll be a residue of that, but I think there'll also be a feeling that, well, I don't, like, I do want to sell my art. I don't want to paint and not sell my art. I want to sell my art, and I want the opportunities that flow from that. Nisi says he saw beauty in the poor at this point. May says light and weather. Okay, so he says, whenever I see Uncle Vincent, I'm struck anew by something indescribably charming, and I should say something good and spiritual in him. I do not know what to call it. Father has it even more. Uncle Jan in another way, and it is also in Uncle Cor. Even in 100 people, you would not always find one like them. So let us carefully treasure their memory and their image. So you kind of get the sense that he's really trying to live up to this idea of being a man, right? Thanks a lot, May. Thanks for that. Then he says, he to whom he had chance to address himself was a stranger who had an impressive air, but at the same time a sad, depressed quality. Now and then he seemed to be thinking of the past. He had something very resolute about him, always deeply moved and agitated. At first, he hardly listened to Telemachus's question, but at last he answered, you are right. Ulysses has been received by King Alcinous, as in a place where they fear God and offer hospitality. So here he writes about Ulysses, Ulysses, where he's just referred to him as Odysseus, right? It's the same person, just different sort of languages and cultures, referring to the same thing. I think Telemachus is a king. He talks about Ithaca, so he's obviously getting quite caught up in some of the Greek myths that he's dealing with. He talks about Telemachus. Telemachus looked at him fixedly. The longer he looked at him, the more moved and astonished he was. That stranger, said he to Mentor, has answered me like a man who hardly listens to what is said to him and who is full of bitterness. I pity those who are unhappy because I am too, and my heart is drawn to him without my knowing why. He has received me badly enough. He has scarcely deigned to listen to me or to answer. Yeah, he's quoting from the studies that he's doing. Is this a long letter? Okay, so I'm just going to skip that part. He says, I'm not astonished to see you so moved. The cause of your sorrow is unknown to you, but not to Mentor. It is nature speaking, making herself felt. It is she who softens your heart. The stranger who touched you so deeply is the great Ulysses. He is going straight to Ithaca. Already he is quite near the port, and at last he again sees the place so fervently longed for. Then the penultimate paragraph in this letter is also all about Ulysses. He says, Your eyes have seen him, but without knowing him, soon you will see and know him, and he will know you. But now the gods cannot permit your knowing each other outside of Ithaca. His heart has been no less moved than yours. All of this is quoting from this mythology. But he is too wise to reveal himself to any mortal in a place where he is exposed to treachery. Ulysses, your father, is the wisest of all men. His heart is like a deep well. One cannot fathom its secrets. He loves truth and never abuses it, but he tells it only when it is necessary and wise. His lips are sealed to vain words at all times. How moved he was when speaking to you, how he is to force himself not to reveal himself, what he has suffered in seeing you. That was what made him dejected and sad. So pretty much half or a third of this entire letter is sort of quoting from some of the Greek mythology studies that he's been doing that has sort of caught his attention. He's just kind of repeating it. And then he signs off saying, and now, boy, a warm handshake in thought. And let's go on to the next letter. This is also quite a long one. 5th of August, 1877. Whoa, these letters are long. These letters are really long. So I'm going to skip a little bit when it gets to preachy. He says, Dear Theo, thanks for yesterday's letter. It was a good one. There was so much of it, so much in it. It was quite refreshing to me. He says, I found a few stamps enclosed for which many thanks. And then you say you will send a money order so that I can come to The Hague to see the exhibition of drawings. So I think his brother is sending him money, even though his brother owes this big debt for the doctor. He says the money order arrived. Robbie Robin, thanks a lot. What is that? Fist bump. Thanks a lot. Okay. Shall I just put this there so you guys can see? Or read along if you want to. So his brother's sending him money for stamps. His brother's sending a money order. He says the money order arrived today, Sunday. Many thanks for it and for your kind offer. So even at this stage, as a 24-year-old, his 20-year-old brother is kind of sponsoring him in a way. And 17 years later would kind of still be. He says, many thanks for it and your kind offer, but I'm sending it back and will not come, much as I should like to see the beautiful and interesting things which you write about. So really this kind gesture from his brother, and he says, thanks so much, but sorry, no. And I think he's kind of saying, I can't do that. I've got to work. I've got to study. He says, I've already refused to go to barn first because I'd rather spend my Sunday in going to church a few times, in writing and in studying a little. So he's kind of saying, thanks for sending me money to come and see you. I'm not going to do that. I'm rather going to go to church, write and study. He says, I should have to ask Uncle Stricker for the money for the journey. He has money from father, which is at my disposal in case of need, but I hope to use it as little as possible. So you can see he's already kind of passing up. So someone gives him money and he's already kind of passing it up. He's already kind of acting like this almost saint, like, don't give me money, right? He says, if I go to The Hague, I must also go to Barn, and then once is not enough. I'd rather not. Besides, boy, I know you need the money yourself, but many, many thanks, you know. I do not regret in any way not always having money in my pocket. So yeah, he talks about it. I do have a craving for thousands of things that if I had money, I would spend it perhaps on books or other things which I can very well pass by and which would distract me perhaps from my studies. You see how earnest he is. Even in my current situation, it is not always easy to resist distractions. I wonder how Vincent van Gogh would do in the social media age. Would he be on Facebook? Would he be on Twitter? Would he not be on any social media? Would he have a phone? It would be quite interesting in terms of trying to resist distraction. He says, if I had books in reach of my hand, it would only make it worse. I understand that the same as the pauper and the needy of the world, one can be enriched in God, and that this treasure, nothing can take it from you. Perhaps one day we will have leisure for all books. So that's kind of what he thinks is, if he has money, what will he spend it on? Well, books, right? Yeah, as Corinna says, the self-deprivation again. He's used to self-deprivation. He's used to going without, right? He says, perhaps one day we will have leisure for all books. We would then have regretted spending our youth only in our personal satisfaction. So it's quite weird that he's already talking about being old and regretting that they had fun, I guess, when they were young, and saying the right thing to do when you're young is to read. Anyway, he goes on to say, in the midst of life, we are near death. That is a phrase which touches each one of us personally. It is a truth we see again confirmed in what you tell me about Caroline van Stockham, and formerly we saw it in another member of the same family. It has touched me, and with all my heart, I hope she may recover. So he's just talking about, he has actually seen quite a few people deceased personally, and even children, and he's kind of aware of the fleeting nature of life, which is quite profound. You don't often see that kind of profundity in such a young man. Once again, the link between life and death, and that death is a reality, right? You don't often see it with young people who are trying to escape limiting things and be free, right? And this dude's walking around cemeteries and so on. Anyway, he says, it has touched me, and with all my heart, I hope she may recover. Oh, what sorrow, what sadness and suffering there is in the world, in public as well as in private life. How everything is changed in that house compared to what it was a few years ago. Then he says, let's see if I can read it. He says, das war vor langen Jahren, wenn wir beisammen waren. That was many years ago when we were together. Longfellow says, there are thoughts that make the strong heart weak, but above all it is written, let him who puts his hand to the plow not look back and be a man. So that's kind of what he's saying to himself. I'm studying to be a pastor. He's ultimately going to fail at this, but he's saying to himself, don't look back, don't hesitate, work, concentrate, be a man. I remember when I studied quantity surveying, kind of taking the same approach, kind of saying, don't think about it. It's time to grow up. It's time to put things that you really like and whatever aside. It's now time to get to work. Let's get serious. Be a man. Anyway, he says, if she should soon recover enough to be moved to The Hague, and if you see her, then remember me to her, if you can find words which will cheer her or give her courage. So here are these two young men, two brothers, talking about, I think, a young woman, a peer that has gotten sick, and they're hoping that she recovers. They're obviously quite fond of her. He says, remind her of how much she's needed in this world and of the right and reason she has to live, especially for her children's sake. I guess maybe it's a slightly older person if she's got kids. Then he says, this morning I was up rather early and left the house about 6 o'clock to go to early morning service. Then I walked through all kinds of old streets where I wished you were with me. Talks about Dubigny, who's an artist who lived in Orvez, and I'm not going to go through all of this. Goes on a little bit. Then he goes back to the whole Greek tragedy thing. I think he's quoting from it. He says, the earth is ever ungrateful. She always bestows her fruit on those who cultivate her with care and with love. She refuses her wealth only to those who fear to labor for her. The more children the peasants have, the richer they are, if their lords do not tax them too heavily, for from their earliest childhood the children begin to assist them. I'm not sure if I completely agree with that. I don't know if that's true today. I don't know if you would say the more children one has, the richer you are. But I guess maybe that's thinking of it in purely monetary terms. Anyway, just something to think about. He says the youngest, and bear in mind, Vincent van Gogh didn't have any children himself. He says the youngest tend the sheep in the meadows. Those who are a little older have large herds entrusted to their care. The oldest work with their father. Meanwhile, the mother prepares a simple meal for her husband and her dear children, who will come home tired from the day's toil. She milks the cows and the goats, and streams of milk are flowing. She makes a big fire around which the whole innocent, happy family sits singing of an evening until the time comes for peaceful repose. I don't know if you can see what's happening here is Vincent's getting caught up in a kind of a sentimentality. He's kind of getting caught up in sort of a longing for the past, which was a more primitive past than the one that is actually in. Right? In other words, he's pining for a past world, which to some extent he recognizes in his Greek myths, but he's pining for a world that is, in a technological sense, poorer than the one that he's living in. In a sense, is in a kind of regression, where he's wishing that he was somewhere else, he's wishing he was in a different world, but he's also wishing that he's in a world that is very basic. It's a world of kind of agriculture, it's a world of poverty, it's a world of, when I say poverty, I really just mean simplicity, but of materially, it's not very sophisticated. It's a simple, agricultural sort of rural scenario. It's traditional, it's family, it's animals, it's close to the earth. And while all of that is quite sweet and makes quite pretty pictures, it's kind of resisting the march of time and the march of civilization. You might say it's good to reject the world, or it's good to reject culture, or it's good to reject material things. And there's a point to all of that. But what's also good is to belong to the world that you live in. And I mean that in terms of you find your place, in terms of your journey and your search, but also that the world looks at you and says, you are in the right place. You have found your place. You know what I mean? So in other words, you need to go out into the world and kind of belong to it and contribute to it and be part of the overall ebb and flow of the world, not sort of jump up and step outside of the river and look at it and sort of think about lakes and seas and whatnot. In other words, what Vincent's doing is he's sort of substituting himself, or he's substituting books and other things, artificial things, art, books, writing, for the lived experience, right? And every now and then he has a glimpse of the lived experience in terms of nature around him, the light and so on. And I'm not sure if he's realizing it, but the lived experience means so much more than this pining for some lost Arcadia. Does that make sense? So I guess what I'm trying to say is what he really needed to do was basically take on if he doesn't like where society is going, and you're such a serious student of culture and philosophy and whatnot, then take on the problem of society and try and find a creative solution to it. And ironically, it seems like that is what he ended up doing. He did end up defining a new kind of art, which is a new kind of way of looking at the world. Does that make sense? Nisi says, Karina, I loved your comment. Karina says, obviously I was joking. No woman should be defined if she has children or not. I don't know why we're talking about Johnny Depp. This is about Vincent van Gogh, but I know he's quite a creative dude. But Nisi says something about may keep it uncomplicated, but you may miss so much in life. Yeah. I'm trying to see what Karina said. Not there. It says only society will spin that narrative. Yeah, okay. May says he's a very talented artist. This looks like May is a fan. You get what I'm saying about Van Gogh, that his solution to the world is to kind of check out of it and to kind of say the past is better, and I like that. Where the only way to improve, because you live in the present, you live in reality, is to acknowledge your reality and say, well, I'm going to steer reality, or I'm going to try and influence reality. I'm going to take on the problem that I see around me, and I'm going to have some effect on it one way or the other. And then that's going to be what I do with my life force, right? You can't do that by kind of going, life sucks, and wow, I really like that story. Do you know what I mean? You aren't really taking responsibility. You're avoiding life rather than taking it on, right? Okay, so that's basically the end of that letter. He talks about, I hope you had a good Sunday, and some of his cousins. Okay, and then now we jump to the 18th of August. Dear Theo, I long to write to you again. Nisi says, yes, the past is not as painful for many. Fear of the future. I do think, like that saying, the good old days. I do think that all of us are susceptible to that good old days crap, where you think things were so much better in the past. And there are very few things that were better in the past. There are things like the air might have been a bit cleaner, but generally speaking, it's a bit of a cop-out to just the present. It's just feeling, well, I don't really want to deal with this. The good old days were better. Not really. Not really. But I suppose it does depend to some extent on you and your personal circumstances. I'm just saying, even if the good old days were better, thinking that's not going to help you, thinking that the good old days were better is not going to help you sort of improve your situation. In fact, it's going to start making you seem more and more irrelevant to other people and perhaps even to yourself, right? Sometimes when you see old photos of yourself, you recognize both your naivete and also your kind of lost potential, that had you known what you knew now, how much time you could have saved and just how effective you could have been. If you just that and that and that, and think about Van Gogh now. If he just kind of realized, don't go this route, become an artist. If he could have saved himself 5 years, but I guess life doesn't work that way. Maybe it was important that he learned the religious side to address that in his art, because he does. In his art, he has religious themes. The thresher, harvesting of wheat, autumn and winter, and, themes of harvest and themes of abundance, that kind of thing. Basic biblical themes in a sense. Okay, am I going to read this paragraph? Okay, this is cool. He talks about Dickens. So he says, Thursday I had a nice morning. I had to be at Stricker's at 7 o'clock because Jan was going to Paris and I had promised to see him off. So I got up early and saw the workmen arrive in the yard while the sun was shining brightly. You would be intrigued by the sight, that long line of black figures, big and small, first in the narrow street where the sun just peeps in, and later in the yard. Then I breakfasted on a piece of dry bread and a glass of beer. That is what Dickens advises for those who are on the point of committing suicide as being a good way to keep them, at least for some time, from their purpose. So now, if you're a student of Van Gogh and you want to know, when does he refer to suicide in his letters? Well, he has a reference, quite a rare reference. It's probably one of a handful. And so he's obviously been reading Dickens, and Dickens says, I guess if you're at the point of committing suicide, drink beer and eat a piece of dry bread. And I don't know if you remember him advising his brother to eat lots of bread. Give us this day your daily bread. So in some ways, Vincent's a little bit too intense. It's like quite literal with some things, quite sort of fundamentalistic, I guess. I've also got to tell you, I've been to Amsterdam, and there's this one square, I think it's called De Dam. It's quite spectacular. It's this sort of large open space, and it's got pretty big buildings around it. And as far as I know, my great-grandfather actually was commissioned to sketch it or to paint it, which was then, I think, published in a Dutch newspaper. But it's quite a spectacular setting, and there's quite a big statue, I think, in the middle of it, if I'm thinking of the right one. And from that perspective, you're not very high above everyone else, but you can nevertheless sort of climb onto the statue or some of the pedestals of it. And I was there when it was sort of swarming with tourists, but there are so many people that do look like this they look like a swarm of bees. They're just, or like ants. Although you're right there, the square is big enough that people are like ants swarming around, and they're just like everywhere. And so that when he writes that, that's what I see. And so within that context of all these people swarming around, he's eating dry bread and drinking a glass of beer and very happy. Or I guess content, that's exactly what he wants. Look at me, I'm living a simple life. I'm a good soul. He says, even if one is not in such a good mood, it is right to do it occasionally while thinking, for instance, of Rembrandt's picture. So he's really trying to find his way to be the kind of man that he thinks one should be. And he's getting this education of the kind of man he thinks he should be through books, through the Bible, through Greek myths. Of course, the best way to get that sense of being a man is through the lived experience, through meeting other people, through, the intercourse of interacting with people in lots of situations. And I don't know if he's really doing that, which is why I think he eventually makes quite a big leap from being this chaste, serious figure to being a figure that is quite different to that. Still serious, although I think when he would drink, that seriousness would become something else. Okay, so then he said something about the forges that he saw and the cooper shops and the narrow alleys and the canals with narrow bridges. I must say, Amsterdam is a beautiful city. It's got all these little nooks and crannies, all these little small, cute corner shops. Someone that I stayed with in The Hague described, I think they described Amsterdam as Amsterdam Disneyland or something. Like the whole city is almost like a fair, what's it? A fairground. The whole city is almost like a carnival ride. It's not in a sense real. Everything is like one big tourist attraction. You know what I mean? And so you kind of get the sense that Amsterdam is like this fantasy place. It's not really a real place in the Netherlands. If you want to go to a real place, you just go anywhere else, like The Hague, which is just about an hour south. Karina says, I haven't been in a long time to Amsterdam. Nisi says, my friends compared Amsterdam to the number one party on earth. Yeah. I didn't really take part in the partying there. I just, I kind of just passed through. I really wasn't in Amsterdam very much. I did go to the galleries. I guess I was a bit Van Gogh-like in being quite serious about what I was going to do with my time. Yeah. Okay, so then he says it was interesting to watch the start of a new day's work there. Now he talks a bit more about his studies. He says, I've written a composition in which all the parables are arranged in proper order and the miracles, etc. I'm doing the same in English and French and expect to be able to write it later in Latin and Greek too. I'm starting to wonder how many languages could this guy speak, because I think he could speak Dutch, English, French, German, and then if you're studying Latin and Greek, that would be six languages. That's quite a talented mind. As I say, when I do study Latin, I studied some Dutch. I studied Afrikaans and Nederlands, which is Afrikaans and Dutch, and I passed that. Yeah, Latin, I was just like, I don't have time for this. I mean, I enjoyed Latin in a legal context, but learning like to tell a story in Latin was just like, what's the point of this? There's no Latin country where you can kind of go and speak Latin. Learn at least any other language, French, German, whatever. Corina says, I often get asked by American guests when this town or that closes because they do think it is a tourist attraction. Who painted the Mona Lisa again? Leonardo da Vinci. Nisi says, my father, the artist and musician, speaks 6. He blows my mind. That is pretty incredible. How many do you speak, Nisi? Not there yet. Toured Europe, but never been to Amsterdam. Amy says, I took Latin in high school. It helped with my medical profession. Yeah, Latin is, the source code for tree names, the plant record, legal terms, medical terms, quite a lot. Yeah. One thing that I found fascinating when I studied law was how we studied the history of languages, and the fact that languages actually have a tree, that some languages come from one another, and some languages are related to other languages and other languages aren't. I just found that sort of linguistic, um, do you want to call it genealogy? But just those relationships, I found that really fascinating. And to think that this language is older than that language, and this language predates all of these languages, I just found that totally fascinating. And it also kind of gave you a sense that there was a certain association of language with sophistication of certain civilizations. So, for example, if you say which language was the first to be written down, just quite interesting to think about that. So August 3rd, 1877, letter from Vincent. It talks about, did you do any drawing while you were there? I was at Wissenbrook's studio a few days before I left for London, and the memory of what I saw there, the studies and pictures, is still as vivid as that of the man himself. So yeah, Vincent's writing about drawing and just saying being in an artist's studio was terribly exciting for him. He also asked his brother to, when he writes again, tell him about the exhibition that opened and how many picture subjects could the artist find here on the wharf. So it's quite amazing that he's in Amsterdam and he's asking his brother to tell him how many paintings can you count where you are that were actually painted in Amsterdam. So, just shows you what a picturesque setting he was in even 155 years ago. And it definitely is very picturesque. Then he talks about, he says, each day I try my best to get on with my work, especially Latin and Greek. I've already done a great many exercises composed of sentences that remind me of the old school days. For instance, which very excellent philosopher has been condemned to death by the Athenians? The very noble and very wise Socrates. Our life greatly resembles a journey and is exposed to very many and very great dangers. The nature of Odysseus and the grapes of the vineyard. He's obviously very enamored by the whole Ulysses thing. This morning, he says, I got up very early. It had been raining overnight, but very soon the sun broke through the clouds. The ground and the piles of wood and beams in the yard were drenched, and in the pools, the sky's reflection was quite golden from the rising sun. At 5 o'clock, I saw those hundreds of workmen scatter like little black figures. Haven't I read this already? 3rd of August. Because here he talks about, I also heard from home that you had a 40 guilder bill from Dr. Costa. A lot of this seems like we've been here before. Okay. Anyway, let's just go on to the next letter. See what I did. Yeah, okay. Okay, I'm just going to jump onto 18th of August. He says, it was on Minna's birthday last Sunday, and being there that evening, Uncle Stricker asked me a few things about my work and did not seem to be dissatisfied. I feel that I've made some progress. Thursday I had a nice morning. Uncle Jan had gone to Utrecht and I had to be at Strickers at 7 o'clock. Oh, this is where he talks about the site. Did I go? Must have clicked on the wrong thing here. Sorry, guys. Let's move on to the next one. I think it's because you've got the same painting on both of these. Anyway, let's go to the 27th of August. It says, it will soon be Mother's birthday. Therefore, I'm enclosing a money order for 1.25 guilders. I should like it if you and I could give her something together. It is not much, but it is all I have. It's really not a lot of money. If you contribute the same amount, we can buy a good photograph. So that's what he's thinking of giving his mother for her birthday, is a photo. Remember, at that time, the photography was like, wow. Photography was like cutting edge technology. He says, yesterday was a rainy morning, so I had to put on my overcoat to go to the early service in the North Church. Talks about Acts 4 verse 11. This is the stone which was set at naught of you builders, which has become the head of the corner. He talks a bit more about other things, and then he says, will you be going on a business trip this autumn, and will you come to Amsterdam then? I certainly hope so. Right as soon as you know anything about it. We must make the most of our chance to be together. Last week, a ship was launched in the yard, a monitor, the Dragon. It was an interesting sight and a joyous occasion for the workmen. Bickers Island also has many shipyards, but for smaller vessels. When I go there, I look at them carefully. He who must learn to work must watch the workers, especially if he has a little study right among the workshops. For just as large and small ships are under construction in a shipyard, gradually finished and then launched, so in the study, large and small works are planned. So, in the Bible, there are quite a few references to fishers of men and going out in the boat and, feeding the 5,000. You wonder whether Van Gogh in this setting is thinking, am I going to be a preacher to fishermen? And so I must understand their lives, the boats and their whole lifestyle. But ultimately, he didn't kind of go on ships or whatever. He went to the mines. Ultimately, he took that route. And I think it was because he got caught up in the writings of Émile Zola. I think that was what really got him all excited. It was like, this is hardcore. This is hardcore, so this is for me, kind of thing. Karina says, I'm dying for a glass of wine, but I can't because of surgery. Well, I hope this is helping you to sort of transcend that thirst. Can you not drink something like apple juice? Okay, so that is about it. This is written around about the time of his mother's birthday. And now we on to the 4th of September. It says, Dear Theo, encloses a short note for Anna and Lies. Please add a word and send them in time for mother's birthday. I must tell you that I'm sending them to you because I'm afraid of having no stamps by that time, except for a letter home. If you should write later, these can also wait. So that's our query is. He doesn't even have money for stamps. So he's kind of sending what he needs sent to his brother, who will then put stamps on them and send them on, I guess. He says, it's very quiet here in the house now, but still the days go by rapidly as I have lessons daily and must prepare for them. I wish the days were longer so I could accomplish more, for it is not always easy work and even continuous plodding. That's kind of how he describes what he's doing every day, continuous plodding. It's not fun, but he's kind of forcing himself to do it. He says it gives meager satisfaction. So he's definitely not enjoying it. He's saying it's the amount of joy is meager, right? He says, I'm convinced that what is difficult is right, even though one sees no results. He says, I'm also copying the whole of the Imitation of Christ from a French edition. Sounds like he's literally writing a book by hand based on copying another book. Funny enough, that's also something I did as a very small child. I just thought writing a book is this incredible thing to do. And so I took this children's book and I just rewrote everything and, tried to make my own little book just to feel what it felt like. For me, books were magical things, filled with thoughts and memories that can outlast you, that can outlast your voice, can outlast your life. I thought that was quite an incredible thing to be preoccupied with. Thanks, Nisi. Okay, so he goes on to say, I'm copying it in the evening. It means much work, but I've finished most of it and I know no better way to study it. I also bought Bousseau's blah, 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 blah. I feel it is necessary to work as hard as I can. I often think of that phrase, the days are full of evil. One must arm oneself and try to be filled with as much goodness as possible. He says, as you know, it's no small undertaking and we do not know the result. So this guy's no slouch. I mean, he's working really hard. He's giving himself homework. He's really, Karina says, I live in a wine region. That must make it more difficult. May says, Nick, we cherish you. Thanks, May. So this guy is really doesn't have a problem when it comes to work ethic. He's kind of like his own slave driver, right? He says, at all events, I will try to fight the good fight. Then I'm going to jump a little bit further. He says, there's something I cannot resist telling you, Theo, you from whom I have no secrets. There's much that is good and beautiful in Uncle Jan's, Uncle Cor's, and Uncle Vincent's lives, but still something is lacking. Don't you think that when the first two sit together, as often happens of an evening, in that lovely, restful room, which you also know, it is a sight which warms the heart. And then he says, Father possesses what they lack. It is good to be a Christian, to try to be one, to be one entirely, for that is eternal life. He says, now I will go even further and say what they lack. Their homes and families also lack. Perhaps you will think or speak of the man who saw the mote in his brother's eye and did not see the beam in his own. And then I will answer, that may be so, but this is at least true. It is good to be a Christian, to try to be one entirely. So that's obviously what he's trying to do. He's trying to sort of be a full-on 100% Christian. He's trying to go the whole hog kind of thing. He's trying to kind of give his entire life over into it. He also seems quite fascinated by the Jews and Jewish things. He says, I'd love to show you several things in the Jewish quarter and also other places. I often think of Dr. Gogh. There are interiors with wood choppers, carpenters, grocery stores, forgers, chemists, which would have delighted him. This morning I saw a big, dark wine cellar and warehouse with the doors standing open. For a moment I had an awful vision in my mind's eye. You know what I mean? Men with lights were running back and forth in the dark vault. It is true, you can see this daily, but there are moments when the common everyday things make an extraordinary impression and have a deep significance and a different aspect. Your letter arrived just as I was writing this. Many thanks. I was greatly surprised to read that Gladwell was at The Hague. Give him my best love. I immediately sent him a postcard asking him to try his very best to come to Amsterdam. Do try to persuade him also. So jumping a bit further, he says, I hope your acquaintance with Gladwell will deepen and leave some good behind. Another pretty long letter, that one. 7th September. Dear Theo, it was a delightful sensation to hear Gladwell's voice in the hall while I sat working in my room upstairs, and to see him enter a moment later and to shake hands with him. Yesterday, we took a long walk through the principal streets and past most of the churches. This morning, we got up before 5 o'clock to see the workmen enter the yard, and then we walked to Seerburg. We have been to the Trippenhuis twice, and he went alone to Van der Hoop's. He was also at Uncle Cor's gallery, but Uncle was out of town. He goes on to say, I should also like to go with him to Haarlem to see the pictures by Frans Hals. And now he is going there and not to Antwerp as he intended. He'll go to Belgium another time and limit himself to Holland now. We also spent a great deal of time in my study and talked about many things, new and old. Once more, as he sits here beside me, I experience the same feeling that drew me to him so often, as if he were a son of the same house and a brother in faith, because he loves the man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. Then he sort of talks about God and Christianity, and he talks about Gladwell, I think, giving him Bunyan's book, Pilgrim's Progress, which he says is as great an acquisition as another book. And he says, the time passed only too quickly for me, and I wish that we might have been together longer. For my part, I'm grateful from the bottom of my heart that it has been given me to see him again and to find in him still what first attracted me. With all my heart, I hope he will keep a pleasant and good memory of his stay in Holland. So you kind of get the feeling that he has friends, but very few. And when he does see them, it means a lot to him. But, you kind of get the sense that he is quite a lonely guy. He's not socializing very much. He's definitely not socializing enough. Now we go on to the 18th of September. I must say, I thought by now I would be in like the middle of the next year. So, yeah, it's taking a while. Just so many letters. Dear Thea, the time approaches when you will go on your business trip for Goupil and Key, and I'm already savoring the prospect of seeing you again. I want to ask you one thing. Could you not arrange it so that we could be quietly and calmly together for at least one whole day? So, yeah, he's appealing to his brother. Remember earlier he'd sent back money that his brother sent him to say, I'm going to be going to church and working. Well, now it's just a couple of months later, and now he's really appealing to his brother, can we visit one another? You kind of get the sense that in the interim, he's gotten quite lonely, right? Now that Gladwell has left, he feels that loneliness, he feels that sort of sadness. Not there yet, says there's a sadness in him. Nisi says he may be an introvert with others, but not in his mind. It says this week Mendes is out of town, spending a few days with the Reverend Schroeder at Zwolle, a former pupil of it. So having some leisure, I could carry out an old plan to go and see the etchings by Rembrandt in the Trippenhuis. I went there this morning, and I'm glad I did so. While there, I thought, could not Theo and I see them together someday? Think it over, whether you could spare a day or two for such things. How would a man like Father, who so often goes long distances, even in the night with a lantern, to visit a sick or dying man, to speak with him about one whose word is light, even in the night of suffering and agony? How would he feel about the etchings of Rembrandt? So, yeah, you really see the combination of Vincent's yearning for company, for the satisfaction of this other thing that he's yearning for, becoming a preacher, I guess, and then also the place of art within that whole kind of conversation. He's talking about religious how can I put it, religious motifs, the burial of Jesus, but through painters' minds and eyes, right? Um, but can you see how all of it's sort of mixed together? Okay, so I'm just gonna. So he says, I spent Monday evening with Voss and Key. They love each other truly and can easily perceive that where love dwells, God commands his blessing. It is a nice home. Now, I've got to say that name rings a bell. I'm not quite sure how to make sense of this because he talks about spending the evening with Voss and Key, but I'm pretty sure that Van Gogh had a relationship with someone called Key Voss, who I think was a relative. Um, so anyway, so he says, I spent Monday evening with Voss and Key. They love each other dearly, and one can perceive that where love dwells, God commands his blessing. It's a nice home, though it is a great pity that he could not remain a preacher. When one sees them side by side in the evening in the kindly lamplight of their little living room, quite close to the bedroom of their boy, who wakes up every now and then and asks his mother for something, it is an idyll. On the other hand, they have known days of anxiety and sleepless nights and fears and troubles. Now, I could be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure um, Van Gogh develops a crush on Key. So she's a married woman, she's a mother, and he develops basically an inappropriate feelings towards this person. I'm not quite sure why it's referred in the letter as Voss and Key, but anyway, we'll see what happens from here. Yeah, I think she is a cousin. She is a relative, but a totally inappropriate relationship. She's married, she's a mother, she's a relative. I mean, you couldn't really be more inappropriate, right? Then he says, walk back over big piles of sand near the East Railway, you know where I mean, and along the Buitenkant, the moon was shining and everything was full of Matisse, Maris, and Anderson. So he's kind of saying through paintings, through these artists, what we saw, and presumably his brother knows what he's talking about. Then he says, from there you get such a superb view of the town and the towers, and here and there lights on one side and on the other. And then this he actually wrote in English. Now bear in mind, these letters are actually written in Dutch, but this part is actually written in English. When the sound ceases, God's voice is heard under the stars. And then there's a lot of rejoice, oh young man, and blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to, wow, this goes on and on and on. So we pick it up where he writes, Rembrandt knew that from the rich treasure of his heart, he brought forth, among other things, that drawing in sepia, charcoal, ink, etc., which is at the British Museum, representing the house of Bethany. In that room, twilight has fallen. The figure of our Lord, noble and impressive, stands out serious and dark against the window through which the evening twilight is shedding itself. At the feet of Jesus sits Mary, who has chosen that good part which shall not be taken away from her, and Martha is in the room busy with something or other. If I remember well, she stirs the fire or something like it. That drawing I hope never to forget, nor what it seems to tell me. I am the light of the world. He that followeth me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life. And then there's a lot more Bible verses. This is a freaking long letter. And then he talks about Mr. Voss again. He says, last week, Hendrik and Marie were here for a day. They've gone now. Monday, a telegram arrived saying that the Madeira had arrived in Southampton. The day they left, Uncle took a train to Nivendip at 6 o'clock in the morning to see them off, together with Mr. Voss, who had come here from Utrecht the night before. Oh boy, how glorious it must be to have a life behind one like Pa's. May God grant us to be and to become increasingly sons after the Spirit and his heart. He says, have a good time, write soon. Compliments to the Ruses, your loving brother, Vincent. That was a very long letter, 18th of September. Now we go to a month, more than a month later, 21st of October, 1877, from Amsterdam. Dear Theo, I want you to hear from me soon again. Yesterday I had a good letter from Eton, from which I learned that you had already been there and are expected back Saturday night to spend Sunday at home also. Probably you are there at this moment and it will be a good Sunday. Talks about going to an early service in the North Church. He says, did you have a good journey? Let me hear from you soon. It was a delightful surprise when you came here that evening. Then he talks about the young woman at the station had already been wondering about our hurried departure. So a rare mention of a young woman. Bear in mind, he's 24 years old. After coming home, I sat working a long time. That is already a week ago now. The days fly by. He says, how beautiful that engraving after Ari Scheffer, the holy woman at the tomb of Christ. I'm so glad I have it. The old woman especially is splendid. Have you got something new for your collection? Go on with it, for it is a good thing. I'm not going to go through all of this, but he does refer to Dickens's A Tale of Two Cities. He says, in all of them, there's something of the spirit of the resurrection and the life that lives, though it seems dead, for it is not dead, but sleepeth. I wonder whether he doesn't think of himself like that, whether he doesn't think that in terms of his own life, it's like he's asleep, like he's a zombie, like he is not living, that he's trying to awaken out of his lot, right? Is trying to come alive. And so there's something soothing, but also unreachable about this whole idea of being resurrected, but in terms of his actual life. He says, I should like to read more widely, but I must not. In fact, I need not wish it so much, for all things are in the word of Christ, more perfect and more beautiful than in any other book. That etching by Jules Goupil was hanging in my room in London for a long time in the days when I was so full of Michelet and other French authors. I think Harry Gladwell has it now. I had a short note from him after he arrived back in Paris. So if you had to ask me, I remember in the previous live I said, what mental disorder does Van Gogh have? What mental illness, what's his problem? I've actually addressed this previously, but I'm going to kind of do it again. The primary problem, in my expert opinion, and don't laugh when I give it, is that he's lonely. So you can say he's got this disorder or he's schizophrenia or whatever. My diagnosis is that he's lonely. He's lonely, he's sad, he's not socializing, he's not getting the healthy amount of stimulation and whatever that a young man needs. Instead, he's just in books all the time. And that's going to lead to him being, you can either say antisocial or antisocialized. And if you want to call that a disorder, you can, but basically the thing that is not good for him is this extended period of loneliness, this extended period of detachment, this extended period of being basically unhappy, right? Corina says, thanks a lot for that. Then he says, Paris is so enchantingly beautiful in autumn, and that spot above all. How pretty the winter chrysanthemums will be in the little gardens in London. They continue to bloom there all the winter through. So my feeling is that the longer the letters are, the lonelier he is. right? The more he's writing about flowers and churches and cemeteries and Greek myths, the more time he has, which he's spending writing a letter to his brother instead of virtually anything else, right? Then he says, Uncle Jan is also read widely, and there's much that is fine in him, a spiritual affinity. A lot of his writing is also filled with talking about older and, in his mind, better men and men who've achieved things. And it's almost like he wants to be a particular kind of man, but is the way that he's interrogating that question is intellectually, right? For the most part. I mean, he does meet some of these people, he does have some interactions, but a lot of it is behind books and it's all theory. He writes, Nisi says, doesn't society generally agree that introverts must have something wrong with them? Absolutely. I mean, especially our society today thinks that. And yeah, definitely. I think introverts are generally misunderstood. Someone who's quiet is regarded as maladjusted, stupid, scared, intimidated, anxious, weak, all those things. And someone who's loud and confident, but could also be wrong or ignorant, is regarded as charming. Confidence is good, even if it's like a hollow confidence. Transparent, you're not you don't have like a hidden agenda. Nisi says, my husband is an introvert and people think he's angry. Yeah. And then he talks about, I think he shares a hymn or a poem, and so it goes on. Then he says, how is Caroline? Remember me to her and also to the Ruiz family. He says, I have still some work to do and must wind this up. Okay. So from the 20th of October, we go to the 30th of October. Nisi says, I'm an extrovert and people always think I'm happy. I don't think I'm either an introvert or an extrovert. I think I move along that spectrum. I can be very introverted and I can be very extroverted. I think I tend to be introspective. And that, I think, makes me gravitate to introversion. But I think if I decided I want to be an extrovert and I just focused on that, I would probably be extroverted. I would be able to be a lot more extroverted. Karina says it's probably 1:30 a.m. in Paris. Yeah, it's about 1:30 here. I actually need to wrap this up. Well, it's past 2 hours, 10 minutes. I really want to get to 1878, and it just seems like it's never getting there because these letters are so long. So 30th of October, dear Theo, thanks for your last letter. I enjoyed it very much. Yes, boy, that etching after Jules Goupil is splendid, and with all that is linked to it, it makes a good and beautiful whole. It's a good thing to treasure in one's heart. He talks about, I almost envy your having read Carlyle's French Revolution. So that's what his brother's reading, the French Revolution. He says, I've read a little of it, but not all. I found fragments of it in a book by Taine. Then he talks about the history of the 80 Years' War is magnificent. Whoever should make such a good fight in his life would do well. In truth, life is a battle, but it is necessary to defend and protect ourselves, and we must plan and calculate with a cheerful and brave spirit in order to make progress. He says, as we get older, it becomes more and more difficult, and it may rightly be said, does the road go uphill all the way? Yes, to the very end. And will the journey take all day long? Yes, from morn till night, my friend. but the inmost strength of the heart is developed by fighting the difficulties. On granted, he says, one grows in the storm if only we always strive after keeping the heart. Okay, I'm going to skip through that. He says, I know the history of Frederick the Great, illustrated by Menzel. It's a good acquisition. See, just reading a heck of a lot about everything. He's kind of like a sponge. He says, old son, the study of Latin and Greek is arduous. Nevertheless, it still makes me happy. I have finally dived into studies of which I've always dreamt. I cannot sit up so late in the night anymore. Uncle has strictly forbidden it. So he's staying up at night, burning the midnight oil, declaring himself happy, with the subject matter. He says, still the legend under the etching by Rembrandt continues to haunt me. He says, the light shines better in the middle of the night. It's quite an interesting way of putting it. Someone else would say that the night is darkest before the day. He says, the light shines better in the middle of the night. All night, I leave the gas light on low, and often it comes to me to contemplate this poor light in medio noctis, so there's some Latin, while planning my work for the next day and thinking of the best means to study. I know when I was not only at school, but also at university, I used to drive my parents crazy because my light would always be on. And there was a window above the door of my bedroom. And so if my light was on, the light shone through there. And I would often be busy writing or reading. And they sort of felt like, we can't sleep while you are awake. And so there would be this insistence that I go to bed. But anyway, yeah, you have Van Gogh reading until late at night with the gaslight on low. He says, and often it comes to me to contemplate this poor light in medio noctis while planning my work for the next day. I hope to light the fire early in the morning this winter. The winter mornings have something peculiar about them. I think he's got a lot of Latin writing here, which translates to fill my soul with a holy bitterness as it may please thee, and I shall spend all the years of my life in thy service, in the bitterness of my soul. So it's almost like he feels like he must suffer, that suffering is going to burn out the bad stuff, and that he's going to be refined, almost like metal is refined through fire and come out like this sword of, you know what I mean, the sword of truth kind of thing. Another long letter. Wow. So he says here, one afternoon at Uncle Stricker's, I ate hodgepodge, and on this occasion it occurred to me to make an excerpt from Motley. I'll show it to you at Christmas, because I have such a frightful number of stone thresholds and church floors and stone stoops of houses under my eyes and feet. I hit on the idea of making those maps of rocky Scotland and colouring them red and green. I thought of those pickles which Uncle is so fond of and which I've learned to like too. The soul of man is singularly strange, and I think it is excellent to have one, like a map of England made with loving devotion, and to have in it much as possible of the love which is holy in all things, and believes in all things, and hopes all things, and suffers all things, and never perishes. So this is what he is fascinated by and intrigued by, and that's what he goes on to become. Someone who, in an artistic sense, is hopeful, and despite not selling anything, that hope never perishes. And that is what I think we love about Van Gogh, is this durable inner fire that although his life is pathetic and miserable and quite dysfunctional, what he puts onto the canvas is nevertheless something at times remarkable, magical, and kind of masterly, something exceptional, that literally out of that fire of suffering, something good, something refined, something intelligent, but it's actually beyond intelligent, but something, what's the word? Profound did emerge. So it just shows you what the heart and the mind focus on. It almost has to manifest. It's almost like it's automatic or it's inevitable. Let's just see what you guys are saying here. Bria, are you still with us? And it's 1:30 in France. I think I need to let Bria go. So I'm just gonna narrate another 5 minutes or so. Not there, it says he finds the good through the darkness. Susan Becker says writing letters like journaling must have relieved some of his anxiety. Yeah, definitely. Robbie Robbins says his pilot light never goes out. Okay, so he ends off saying, how are you, boy? Write soon if you can. You thought I was right in returning the money, didn't you? You know that I would have just loved to have come and shake hands with you and also to see the exhibition. But for the present, I do not go out of town on Sundays. I must not. Susan, thanks so much. Thank you. Then he says, this is just the end of, thanks a lot, Nisi. Thank you. Then he sort of ends off saying, have you heard anything about Caroline? I had to go to Utrecht on the day of Hendrik's wedding reception. I congratulated them for you too. It was a very stylish affair. The room was very beautifully decorated and the bride looked lovely. In Utrecht, I saw the cathedral and another church and the university building, which reminds one of the cloisters near Westminster Abbey. Goodbye, Theo. Have a good time. My compliments to the Roos family. And I think that's where we're going to call it a day. I'm looking forward to the key VOS stuff. I'm not entirely sure if that happens here or later on, but as far as I know, I mean, when else could it happen if they are in Amsterdam? But you can also see how he's lonely right now. His letters are very long. Thanks, Amy. Thanks, Bria. Yeah, thanks, Susan Becker. Is ripe for to be tempted, I guess. Is ripe to fall in love, I guess, inappropriately in love. And so we'll see when we get to that. Okay, thanks, Susan. Okay, so we'll stop there. We'll pick it up on the 27th of August. Like I say, I can't believe we're still in 1877. But I do think if we'd skipped this, we would have missed a lot of certain moments. And although I think we want to, I think we've also got to resist the urge to skip ahead. So thanks, guys, for sticking with me, and we'll get there in the end. Karina says the last time you were stuck in Dordrecht. Okay. So yeah, thanks for Nisi, Bria, and Stephanie, who was here earlier. Thanks for your modding. Not that it's really necessary with this fantastic group. And then also thanks for all the super chats. It's always very much appreciated. Sometimes when it's like 1:30 in the morning, it's like, what am I doing kind of thing. But I do enjoy this, but it definitely makes the work feel validated, and I feel listened to, and I feel that it's worth it, right? And then also thanks to all the members and a couple of new members as well, including May. So thanks for joining us. Nisi says, I put info about Andy above on Headspace. Let's have a look. Andy, what's Andy's surname? Andy Puddicombe. Yeah, I remember he had a very funny surname, but he kind of went on this journey where he became a monk and he didn't say anything, and then he came back into the world, and I think he's doing fantastically well, but it's a totally different life to the one that he set out on, for sure. Terry says, glad I caught at least a few minutes and enjoyed the live earlier too. Thanks, Terry. Paddy says, another great episode. Thank you, Nick, and blessings on all. Nisi says, a circus performer to monk to now, for sure. And isn't that wonderful that you can reinvent your life? You can create your own story. If you see your life as a story, then what is stopping you from writing your own story, right? Because it is. You can write your own story. You can write a new chapter. You can turn a new page at any time. And that's both exciting and kind of frightening. It's frightening if you don't do it. It's exciting if you do. Okay, so on that note, thanks, guys. Bria, thanks very much for that. I'll see you guys next time. It'll probably be Sunday, so a couple of days from now. Yeah, a couple of days from now, unless it's Wednesday, but we'll see how it goes. But just watch the space. I think on Friday we're doing another CrimeCon 3, so look out for that. Wherever you are, take care. Bria, have a good sleep. And the rest of you that are sort of bedding down in the States, have a good evening and hope you guys sleep well. See you guys next time. Ciao. Timmy, can you say goodbye with your... There we go. Okay, cheers, bye.